Electric Cafe.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. In this video, I'll be reviewing the 1982 album by Talk Talk, and it's called The Party's Over. This is the third time I featured Talk Talk on my channel. The first time was I reviewed Color of Spring from 1986, which I gave a 77 out of 100, and then also I reviewed the 1984 album called It's My Life, and I gave that a 78 out of 100. They're very close, and I went back and forth as I reviewed them, even though they are on my old system. I haven't rated a Talk Talk album for a little bit over a year, so it was on my older rating system, so I do need to slightly revamp those and re-rate those or rescore those with the new system of a 1 through 10 versus a 1 through 5. But when I think of the differences of the album for me, and you would think I would like more of the electronic side because I'm more of an electronic fan than really an alternative rock fan, but I very much like Talk Talk because of, well, even both sides, but there was 3 albums that they did under the more, whatever genre style you want to call it, just alternative rock, and then there was 2 albums under the sort of synth pop side of Talk Talk. So there is more material in the second half, but I really like the recording techniques on the second half. I don't feel like the first side of Talk Talk, the more electronic side, is as special. But when I compare It's My Life and Color of Spring, which is the turning point for the band, which was highlighted specifically the changeover on the Montreal 1986 live performance, which you ever get a chance to check out, it's very important to their career. I felt like here's the DVD of that show, and for me that was kind of the turning point. You know, I would imagine even people that went to that event, you know, expected to hear more synth pop, and then even though they might have heard the new album at the time, like it was already they were pretty much already changing over to the more alternative rock side. You can tell by the performance they're not. It didn't feel like a synth pop show. And so when I compared the 2 albums, like It's My Life is highlighted by 5 extremely strong tracks, and then Color of Spring is highlighted by 4 extremely strong tracks. So when I think of It's My Life, I think of It's My Life, and then Such a Shame. They're probably 2 most respected synth pop tracks of the time. Not necessarily the most successful, although Talk Talk, that song is probably more well known than Such a Shame. But I think when you start to learn and listen to Talk Talk more, Such a Shame is probably even more of a legendary song than It's My Life, even though It's My Life was more successful. So I think of those 2 tracks, and then I think of Tomorrow Started, which is a really great kind of tucked away song that's featured on their greatest hits, and also Renee, which is one of their strongest ballads, and then also I think of Dum Dum Girl. But also, I think of the very highly underrated the track called Last Times, which is a magical synth pop track, which I love the melody on. And so when I think of that, there's 5 or 6 really strong tracks on that. And when I think of Color of Spring, I think of Life's What You Make of It, Happiness Easy, I Don't Believe You, and Living in Another World. Those 4 songs are really strong. So It's My Life has a little bit more better songs overall, but strangely enough, on It's My Life has probably the weakest track on either 2 albums in the excuse me, in the track called the Call the Night Boy, which I think is the weakest track of both albums. But I do think Chameleon on Color of Spring is an okay track, but maybe, you know, kind of a lesser track for the period of their material during that time. Before I get into a track-by-track review of The Party's Over, I always like to tell a little bit of my history with the band, so you know where I'm coming from. When it comes to Talk Talk, 1982, MTV, I'm glued to the set in 1981 and 1982. The beginnings of MTV, it was the first time we got to see a lot of new romantic and new wave artists like Duran Duran and ABC and all these Billy Idol, all these great bands spanned out LA. There was just so many to name. And Talk 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 got a lot of play with the title track of this album. And so 1982, I'm 6 years old. It's a very catchy song. It's not quite, I remember my sister had the single at the time and the 45, and it was a really good song, no doubt, but it was pretty much straightforward. And even though I liked it for the time, I was still looking for something. Even early on as like 6, I could feel that I was more into a little bit more of the maybe I don't know if I was into the darker side of electronic music, but just into the deeper side. I could already tell at like six years old that that Talk Talk, the title song, was a little bit poppy. So I didn't necessarily follow Talk Talk personally. And then It's My Life came out in 1984, and obviously that was a huge hit that was everywhere. It was a song that I really liked, and one of the things I really like about the track is the background vocals of the animals and the birds and stuff like that. And obviously the video was really cool as well for the time, but it's certainly a very catchy song, and it turned out to be an 80s classic. But I still, at that point, didn't really follow Talk Talk or buy any of their albums until in 1990 when I was 14 years old and I bought Natural History. I remember I was at the record store, and a lot of times, especially in the later 80s and early 90s, throughout the 90s, if there was a band that I kind of knew a song or two, but I wasn't really sure of which album to buy. You got to remember this is before the internet. And so, before other people recommended, it was only people in my, your friends and stuff. And none of my friends really knew Talk Talk, or I didn't really have anybody to share experiences with or recommend me an album. So what I would do is I would buy the greatest hits if I wasn't too sure of buying a certain album. So when I bought this album, of course, that became a huge hit because it's littered with a lot of great tracks. I mean, it has Desire on there. It has Such a Shame. But a couple of the key tracks from this particular period that really made me a fan and kind of go back and get all their albums was the inclusion of Today and also My Foolish Friend. And so that made me understand both sides, their newer material and their older material. So I pretty much went back and got all their material at one time. I don't have a copy of The Party's Over anymore. I used to have it on CD, but it got lost. And strangely enough, I don't have a copy of The Party's Over, which I lost as well. But I do have a single of It's My Life, and then later on through the 90s, I did, or early 2000s, I did get some of their other albums called Natural Order. I got their B-sides as well, and also, of course, I got Color My String, and then is the only one I have on vinyl of the albums, and then I got Laughing Stock and Spirit of Eden as well. So I pretty much, gathered, and then I got the DVD of Talk Talk. So I pretty much at that point had most of their material except for some B-sides. So I felt as the 90s went on, they became one of my favorite bands, and I was really impressed by and really happy that I'm blanking on the lead singer of Radiohead, but when he said that Mark Hollis and Talk Talk was sort of the beginning of alternative rock or the change in music in British history as far as like rock bands and recording style, and Radiohead kind of carried that tradition on, or at least that sort of avant-garde style, and blending a lot of their studio techniques and just their sound in general, and just going to a deeper level of popular music. And so I always really respected the lead singer of Radiohead for doing that. And then also the UK press was very important, carrying on the Talk Talk legacy. Because in the late 90s and early 2000s, Talk Talk is virtually, they're not releasing music. There's a couple compilations came out, which I showed you, but for the most part, there's no album that came out after 1991. So for them to be championed by UK media really kept their name in the respected bands and sort of make it out of the 90s as a well-respected band. And so that's kind of carried over to a new generation, thankfully. And a lot of people speak about Talk Talk as one of the best bands of the 80s and 90s, especially from a UK perspective. And so I really respect that, and I definitely give hats off to the media for carrying on the legacy of Talk Talk and Mark Hollis, the singer, especially through his passing. And that's certainly whenever somebody passes away in band, everybody looks back very fondly back at their music career, and I think that took Talk Talk to another level because of Mark Hollis's passing, which was untimely and far too soon. But the amount of respect Talk Talk has gotten and grown over the last, especially 10 years, especially with collectors and buying their material, and some of the albums being reissued as well has certainly helped that. And I'm just a huge fan of Talk Talk, and I really respect both sides of what they of their careers. And so, going back into The Party's Over, I don't think anybody would disagree that The Party's Over is perhaps the least overall ranked album if you ranked all five albums. And certainly that I can foresee that would happen with me, even though I haven't rated Laughing Stock and I haven't rated The Spirit of Eden yet. But it's just natural because I think in some ways I kind of relate myself to Mark Hollis, and when I listen to the discography, I hear the evolution. So going song by song on the album, and you'll see my score here. Starts off with there's 9 tracks on here. First track is called Talk Talk, and it was the first single. Played on MTV, played on the radio airwaves. In some ways, Talk Talk became one of the darlings of synth pop at the time, one of the most popular bands of synth pop, maybe along with Duran Duran at the time, but certainly other bands like maybe Haircut 100 or Split Enz. There was a lot of 82, a lot of the British bands that were coming up on MTV. They were pretty well rounded as far as like some new wave, but also having a little bit longer career than a lot of people did. I think although Talk Talk was new at the time, there was other bands that we thought were brand new because we had never heard them before. And Split Enz goes back to like 1975, or Squeeze was played, and they went back to like the later 70s. So there was everything was very fresh then, and it was because that's the sound of the new wave sound and synth pop. And I wouldn't go as far to say it's a excellent song. It's right on the cusp for me, so I give it 7 3/4 stars. So it's right there. It's certainly a classic in some respect, but it's pretty straightforward for me. It doesn't have too much depth. It's very catchy, but it's not like I wouldn't necessarily put it in the eights as far as like me personally an all-time classic. But it's right there at 7 3/4 stars. It's a very strong song. But I generally like the deeper songs of Talk Talk, and if I was to do a top 20 songs of Talk Talk's history, it Talk Talk, the track would be right on the borderline of being in the top 20. It would probably be somewhere in the top 30. Just not personally one of my favorite songs of theirs, but a song I still really respect, especially for what it did for the band and just how recognizable it is and catchy. And I do think it's a very poppy, catchy song, and I just more on the deeper side of Talk Talk. And then there's track number 2 called It's So Serious. I think this one's really solid. It's right in between good and very good for me at a 6.5. I do really like the verses and the keyboard work in this track, and especially the bridge at the end. But, I think one of the drawbacks of Talk Talk and their more new wave side is the choruses. I feel like sometimes when Mike Hollis sings the chorus and when you're writing a chorus, like it becomes very, I wouldn't I wouldn't go as far as saying it's redundant, it's a chorus, but because a lot of the Talk Talk tracks are, I wouldn't say faster, but certainly Talk Talk, the track is very fast, but there's really not much room for him to express himself in a chorus, I feel like a lot of times. So like a lot of the choruses on the earlier period of Talk Talk, they don't really, I wouldn't say they're not catchy, but they just don't, for me, they just don't quite hit the depth or they, even though they're a peak of the verses and they do a good job of being a chorus and being catchy, I just feel like they kind of lose a little bit, maybe not even the steam of the track or the arc of the track, because they do a good job of that, but maybe they're just a little bit too big sounding and too basic sounding. I don't know if that's maybe the word to say it, but it's so serious. The vocal and the chorus, they just I don't know if they meet as endearing or as charming as the verses do and the keyboard work. I do like the flow of the song, but it's very it's very poppy, and it's pretty much straight to the point. So I like the verses, I like the keyboard work, I like the pace of the song. I think it's right in the sweet spot for Mark Hollis's voice, but the chorus isn't quite there as far as like some of the other tracks. Case in point, and one that I think is successful, in that sort of range is track number 3 is Today. It's just for me, it's the best song on the album. I give it 8.25 stars. I think it's one of the best early songs of Talk Talk as far as a straightforward, more poppy song. But this song is more successful than It's So Serious. You can compare the two. I think the flow of Today is just beautiful, and love the keyboard solo, in the bridge, and the last chorus and fade out is great. It's just an anthem for the earlier period of Talk Talk, and I think it's even better than Talk Talk the track. Then track number 4 is the title track, The Party's Over. You can hear on this track, and after 3 pretty straightforward pop electronic songs or synth pop songs, this song is the longest song on the album, a little bit over 6 minutes. And here is I think when you first get the first impression or the first realization when you're listening to Talk Talk, if it's the first time you ever heard this band, maybe at the time, is that Mark Hollis is the heart and soul of Talk Talk. Like he totally takes over the song, and his vocal is so magical. And although I think that the song doesn't quite get to the highs of other tracks in this vein, maybe even some of the ones maybe that are more towards the electronic rock and maybe not electronic song, because I think the melody in here is on the more basic side, and the progression is better, but better than a lot of synth pop for the time, but just not quite to the level where I would say it's like a excellent song. But I think it's a very good song with a 7 out of 10 rating. But you can here's where I mean you can really tell how Mark Hollis, how he takes over the song and how he makes it flow, and he becomes the focal point of the music, even though the music is pretty dramatic. Like he becomes the main instrument, I feel like, in the song, if that makes sense. Track number 5 is called Hate, and unfortunately it's my least favorite track on the album. I don't think it's bad in any ways, but it's just okay. I give it a 4 out of 10 stars. It feels like a kind of like a throwaway B-side or an album filler, or maybe even a secondary version of Talk Talk, the main track. It just doesn't quite grab me. The keyboard solo at the end isn't bad. It becomes a little bit more triumphant or maybe even dramatic, but just nothing really grabs me as far as like the vocal or the melody or the pacing of the track. I think it's fairly straightforward and doesn't do too much, and doesn't really quite have the depth, or really doesn't feel like a meaningful song to me personally. So unfortunately, that's a song that really kind of hurts the album's overall score when I compare it to the rest of the album. Track number 6, Have You Heard the News? This is my 4th favorite on the album. A bit eerie. I love the pace in this. I like Mark Hollis's vocal in this. Kind of has like a kind of spooky, kind of eerie sound through it, and I really like the flow of it, and just his vocal is really strong as well, and just kind of brings a deeper note to the album. I feel like it gives the album more depth for me. Track number 7 is called Mirror Man. This was a single off the album. I think it's a solid song. I give it 6 out of 10 stars. I don't think it's quite one of the best songs on there. Maybe not the ideal single for it, for as a single off the album, but I do feel like it's very somber, and I do like that side of Talk Talk. It comes off Have You Heard the News on the album really well. I do like the deepness that these two tracks provide. I feel like it does have a little bit of an Eastern Edge sound to it, but I just don't think it's quite has the depth or the flow or as expansive as some of the other songs like Have You Heard the News or The Party's Over. And it doesn't isn't even though it's one of the catchier songs, I feel like even though it's somber, it's not quite to the level of like Today or even the title track Talk Talk, but still a solid song. Again, 6 out of 10 stars. Track number 8 is called Another Word, and similarly to It's So Serious and also Mirror Man, just kind of that mid-range kind of good song, good synth pop version of Talk Talk, but nothing extraordinary. I think it's pretty straightforward. Really nothing grabs me from the song because the rhythm, bass line, drums, and everything is pretty much taken from the track Talk Talk, just slowed down. There's quite a few tracks on here that have the same sort of rhythm pattern and pretty much the same sounds. So there's not too much depth on the rhythm side. This does have a little bit different keyboard, but for the most part, Another Word, Mirror Man, and even today at some point, and it's so serious, all kind of have the same, almost feel like they're very similar in a lot of ways. And I could probably guess this is why Mark Hollis is really feeling like, looking back at this album, like he really wants to move on to a different style, because there's songs on here that kind of sound the same to each other and just not as much depth that I think that he's striving for as Talk Talk moves on. And then the last track, called Candy, which is tied for my second favorite on the album with Talk Talk, the title song, with a 7 3/4 star score. I love this track, and you can see, just like Have You Heard the News, like these two tracks are really the future of Mark Hollis. You can see he really stands out as a singer, and really takes you on a journey through the song, and it adds piano, and it just becomes a more full, more dynamic, more deeper, more introspective track. It just flows really nice, and just is a really strong album closer. And so you can see the progression, even though it's still synth pop. Like I feel like they're striving for something more than just being a synth pop band, and you can see through their career they definitely became that. But I think this album would be so much stronger. Can you imagine if Foolish Friend was on this album instead of like Mirror Man or It's So Serious? Like, Foolish Friend came out a little bit later, maybe half a year or a year later. If that was included on this album, I think it would push it above the 70 score for me and be considered a very good album, or a very good synth pop for the year. But I think it is in consideration for maybe top 10 or top 20 albums of that year for synth pop or new wave. But I can't quite say it's a very good album, and my score drops in at like a 67 out of a 70. So I think it's on the high side of a good album. Possibly hurt by the track called Hate. I think if you take that song out, it does average over a 70. But overall, I still think it's a really good album, and it's kind of it's kind of a bookmark in Talk Talk's career. That's maybe one of the more interesting sides of their career, as far as musically. If there's an album that you'd like me to review for a future video, my email is down below. Just send me a message. You also see in the notes section how I rate songs and albums. If you have any questions, just send them my way on my email. And thanks for your time, and we'll see you on the next video.